The first time Ethan Parker noticed Ryan Cole, the room seemed to shrink around him. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening at the neighborhood gym Ethan had only joined a week earlier. The place smelled faintly of rubber mats and metal, the steady rhythm of weights clanking against racks filling the background. Ethan stood near the dumbbells, staring at the mirror while pretending to understand the workout routine he had saved on his phone. Truthfully, he felt completely out of place. Then Ryan walked in. Ryan Cole wasn't just tall. He was massive in a way that drew attention without him trying. His shoulders were wide enough to block the light from the windows behind him, and every movement carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. Compared to him, Ethan felt almost invisible. And yet, Ryan noticed him immediately. "You're locking your elbows too much," Ryan said calmly. Ethan looked up, startled. Ryan had stepped beside him without Ethan realizing. Up close, Ryan was even more imposing, easily 3 times Ethan's size in both height and muscle. Ethan lowered the dumbbells awkwardly. "Oh, I didn't realize." Ryan gestured toward the weights. "Try again. Keep your arms softer this time." There was nothing harsh about the correction. If anything, Ryan sounded patient, like someone used to helping beginners. Ethan followed the advice, adjusting his form while Ryan watched carefully. "Better," Ryan said with a small nod. Ethan felt strangely relieved by that single word. He hadn't expected anyone to pay attention to him at all. But then again, attention was something Ethan hadn't been getting much of lately. For the past 2 years, Ethan had been in a relationship with Daniel Brooks. When they first met, everything had moved quickly: late-night conversations, spontaneous weekend trips, quiet mornings sharing coffee in their tiny apartment. Daniel had always been charming and ambitious, the kind of person who could light up a room with effortless confidence. Back then, Ethan had believed they balanced each other perfectly. Lately, though, things felt different. Daniel worked late almost every night now. The dinners together had slowly disappeared, replaced by quick messages saying he'd already eaten with coworkers. Even when Daniel was home, he seemed distracted, his attention buried in his phone or drifting somewhere Ethan couldn't follow. At first, Ethan had told himself it was temporary. Stress from work, a busy season, something that would pass. But weeks had turned into months, and the distance between them kept growing. That was part of the reason Ethan had joined the gym in the first place. He needed something, anything, to break the routine of waiting around in an apartment that felt quieter every night. Ryan stepped back as Ethan finished the set. "Not bad," Ryan said. Ethan wiped his hands on a towel, still feeling slightly self-conscious under Ryan's steady gaze. "I just started last week, so I'm kind of figuring things out." Ryan chuckled softly. Everyone starts somewhere. There was a brief pause, the comfortable kind that didn't feel awkward. Then Ryan extended his hand. "Ryan Cole." Ethan shook it. Ryan's grip was firm but careful, as if he understood his own strength. "Ethan Parker," he replied. Ryan glanced toward the row of machines nearby. "If you're new, I can show you a few things that'll save you time." Ethan hesitated for a moment. Accepting help from someone like Ryan felt intimidating, but there was also something reassuring about the offer. Ryan didn't seem judgmental. If anything, he seemed genuinely interested in making sure Ethan didn't hurt himself trying to lift weights he wasn't ready for. "Yeah," Ethan said finally. "That would actually help a lot." For the next 20 minutes, Ryan guided him through a few simple exercises, correcting his posture and explaining how different movements worked. His voice remained steady and encouraging the entire time. Ethan noticed how easily Ryan moved through the gym, greeting people with relaxed familiarity. Yet when he spoke to Ethan, he gave him his full attention. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. When Ethan finally finished his workout, the gym had grown quieter. Ryan wiped down a bench and nodded toward the exit. "Same time tomorrow." The question caught Ethan off guard. But before he could overthink it, he answered, "Yeah, probably." Ryan gave a brief smile. "Good." As Ethan stepped outside into the cool evening air, he checked his phone. One message from Daniel waited on the screen. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Ethan stared at the message for a moment before locking his phone. Behind him, inside the brightly lit gym, Ryan Cole was already preparing for another set. And for reasons Ethan didn't fully understand yet, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. Over the next few weeks, the gym quietly became part of Ethan Parker's routine. Every evening after work, he would change into his workout clothes and make the short walk down the street. At first, he told himself he was only there to improve his fitness, to build some confidence after months of feeling stuck in the same emotional fog. But if Ethan was honest with himself, there was another reason. Ryan Cole was usually already there. Ryan moved through the gym like someone completely at ease in his surroundings. Other members greeted him casually, asking quick questions about exercises or joking about missed workouts. It was clear that Ryan wasn't just another person lifting weights. He belonged there. Yet whenever Ethan arrived, Ryan's attention shifted almost immediately. Right on time, Ryan said one evening as Ethan stepped inside. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall. "Am I predictable now?" Ryan smirked slightly. "Consistent. That's better." The workouts grew easier to follow with Ryan's guidance. He corrected Ethan's posture, adjusted the weight levels, and occasionally pushed him harder than Ethan thought he could handle. Strangely, Ethan didn't mind the challenge. In fact, he found himself looking forward to Ryan's approval more than he expected. "You're stronger than you think," Ryan said during one session after Ethan finished a difficult set. Ethan laughed breathlessly. "It doesn't feel that way." Ryan leaned casually against the rack, arms folded. "Strength isn't just about weight." Ethan wasn't sure if Ryan meant the workout or something else. Between exercises, their conversations began stretching longer. At first they stayed simple: talk about work, favorite movies, random complaints about traffic or bad weather. Ryan had an easy sense of humor that made the gym feel less intimidating. But slowly, their discussions drifted into more personal territory. One evening, as they rested between sets, Ryan asked, "So, you live around here?" "Yeah," Ethan said, "just a few blocks away." "With your partner, right?" Ethan paused briefly before nodding. "Daniel." Ryan didn't react dramatically, but Ethan noticed the subtle shift in his expression, something thoughtful, maybe curious. "You've mentioned him before," Ryan said. "Sounds like you've been together a while." 2 years. Ryan nodded slowly. "That's a long time." Ethan wiped his forehead with a towel, unsure how to explain what his relationship with Daniel had become. Describing it out loud made the distance feel even more real. "Things have been complicated lately," Ethan admitted. Ryan didn't interrupt. That was one thing Ethan had begun noticing about him. Ryan never rushed conversations or filled silence unnecessarily. He listened carefully, giving people space to finish their thoughts. "It's mostly work," Ethan continued. "Daniel's always busy." Ryan studied him for a moment. Busy, or distant? The question was simple, but it landed heavily. Ethan looked down at the floor. "Maybe both." Ryan didn't push further. Instead, he clapped his hands lightly and nodded toward the next machine. "All right," he said. "Let's keep moving." Ethan appreciated that. Ryan didn't treat the conversation like gossip or entertainment. He respected the boundary without pretending the problem didn't exist. Unfortunately, the situation at home wasn't getting better. That same night, Ethan returned to the apartment to find the lights dim and the living room empty. Daniel's jacket was missing from the hook by the door. Ethan checked his phone. A message waited for him. "Running late again. Don't wait up." The words felt painfully familiar. Ethan dropped onto the couch and stared at the quiet room. The apartment used to feel warm, full of small routines they shared together. Now it felt like a place Daniel simply passed through between obligations. The next evening at the gym, Ryan noticed Ethan's distraction immediately. "You're not focused tonight," Ryan said while Ethan struggled through a set. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Just tired." Ryan stepped closer, adjusting the position of the bar in Ethan's hands. His movements were careful but confident. "Try again," Ryan said. Ethan did. This time, the lift felt easier. When he finished, Ryan nodded approvingly. "See," Ryan said, "you're capable of more than you think." For a moment, Ethan met Ryan's gaze. Standing this close, Ethan realized something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. Ryan's presence carried a quiet strength that made everything around him feel calmer, steadier. It was the kind of stability Ethan hadn't felt in months. During the final set, Ethan lost his balance slightly while stepping backward from the bench. Ryan reacted instantly. One large hand caught Ethan by the arm, steadying him before he could fall. For a brief second, they stood closer than either of them expected. Ryan's grip was firm but gentle. "You okay?" Ryan asked. Ethan nodded quickly, though his pulse had suddenly quickened. "Yeah," he said softly. Ryan released him, stepping back just enough to restore the space between them. But something had shifted. Later that night, Ethan walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, replaying the moment in his mind. When he reached his apartment, another message from Daniel waited on his phone. "Out with coworkers tonight." Ethan locked the screen and placed the phone on the counter. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from Daniel. It was from Ryan. "Did you make it home all right?" Ethan stared at the message longer than he expected. Then slowly, he started typing a reply. After that night, Ethan Parker and Ryan Cole began talking more often outside the gym. At first, the messages stayed simple. Ryan would check in after workouts, sometimes sending short reminders about stretching or asking if Ethan's muscles were sore the next day. Ethan usually replied with a quick joke or a complaint about how difficult the exercises had become. The conversations were casual, harmless on the surface. But gradually, they lasted longer. Some nights the messages stretched past midnight, drifting from workout advice into stories about the daily lives. Ryan talked about growing up in a small town where everyone expected him to become a professional athlete. Instead, he had chosen something quieter, coaching people, helping them rebuild confidence through training. "I like seeing people change," Ryan wrote one night. "Not just physically, mentally too." Ethan read the message twice before responding. "I guess that's why you're good at it," he typed. Ryan replied almost immediately, "Maybe. Or maybe I just notice things others don't." Ethan wondered what Ryan meant by that, but he didn't ask. Instead, he focused on the growing tension inside his own apartment. Daniel Brooks had become even more distant. Some evenings, Daniel didn't come home until well after midnight. Other nights, he arrived exhausted and barely spoke before disappearing into the bedroom. When Ethan tried to start conversations, Daniel often brushed them aside with vague explanations about work deadlines or meetings. The distance between them was no longer subtle. It was obvious. One Thursday evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual after leaving the gym. The apartment was quiet, the television dark, the kitchen untouched. Daniel's phone rested on the coffee table. Normally Ethan wouldn't have looked at it. He respected privacy, even when their relationship felt strained. But the screen lit up suddenly. A message appeared. Ethan didn't mean to read it. His eyes simply landed on the words before he could look away. "Tonight was perfect. I miss you already." The sender's name wasn't familiar. Ethan's chest tightened. For a moment he stood completely still, staring at the message as though it might disappear. But another notification appeared seconds later. "Same time tomorrow." The room felt smaller. 1,000 explanations rushed through Ethan's mind, but none of them made sense anymore. All the late nights, the secrecy, the sudden distance, it all aligned too clearly now. Daniel wasn't just busy. He was seeing someone else. When Daniel returned later that night, Ethan said nothing. He watched quietly as Daniel set his keys down and walked past him with a tired smile. "Long day," Daniel muttered before heading to the bedroom. Ethan stayed on the couch long after the lights were off. The next evening at the gym, Ryan noticed the change immediately. "You look like you didn't sleep," Ryan said while handing Ethan a pair of dumbbells. Ethan tried to shrug it off, but his voice sounded flat. "Just a rough night." Ryan studied him carefully. Something happened. Ethan hesitated. He hadn't planned on telling anyone. Admitting the truth would make it real in a way he wasn't ready to face. But Ryan's calm presence made the words easier to say. "I think Daniel's been seeing someone else," Ethan admitted quietly. Ryan didn't interrupt. He simply leaned against the equipment rack, listening. Ethan explained what he had seen on the phone, the messages that left little room for misunderstanding. Saying it aloud felt strange, like describing someone else's relationship instead of his own. When Ethan finished, silence settled between them. Ryan finally spoke. "You didn't deserve that," he said firmly. There was no hesitation in his voice. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, relief mixed with sadness. "I keep wondering when it started," Ethan said. "Or if I should have noticed sooner." Ryan shook his head slowly. "Sometimes people hide things well. That's not your fault." They continued the workout quietly after that, but Ethan's thoughts kept drifting. Every movement felt mechanical, like his body was working while his mind struggled to process the truth. When the gym finally closed, Ryan grabbed his jacket. "I'll walk with you," he said. The streets outside were quiet, lit only by scattered street lamps and the occasional passing car. The air carried the cool calm of late evening. For several minutes they walked without speaking. Then Ethan sighed softly. Everything just feels different now. Ryan glanced at him. Different how? I thought I understood my life, Ethan said. Now it feels like I've been standing in the wrong place the whole time. Ryan stopped walking. Ethan turned to face him. Ryan's expression was serious but steady, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the pavement. You're not lost, Ryan said. You're just realizing you deserve better. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. For weeks he had tried to ignore the quiet pull he felt whenever Ryan was nearby. The comfort, the safety, the sense of being seen in a way Daniel hadn't shown him in months. Now that feeling stood directly in front of him. Ryan didn't move closer, he simply waited. The choice, Ethan realized, was his. And in that quiet moment beneath the dim streetlight, Ethan took a step forward. What happened next changed everything. But as Ethan reached his apartment later that night, another confrontation was waiting behind the door. Daniel Brooks was already home. And this time, he was watching Ethan carefully. When Ethan Parker stepped inside the apartment, he immediately sensed something unusual. Daniel Brooks was sitting on the couch with the lights on, something he rarely did anymore. Normally Daniel would already be in the bedroom or half asleep in front of the television. Tonight, however, he was watching the door as if he had been waiting. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan quietly closed the door behind him and set his keys on the small table near the entrance. The familiar sound echoed louder than usual in the silent room. You're late, Daniel said finally. The comment would have sounded ordinary weeks ago. Now it felt strangely ironic. Ethan walked farther into the living room and faced him. So are you. Daniel frowned slightly, as if unsure whether Ethan was joking. But Ethan's expression didn't change. A quiet tension settled between them. For months Ethan had avoided this conversation, hoping their problems might somehow solve themselves. But after everything he had seen, and everything he had begun to feel, silence no longer made sense. I saw the messages, Ethan said calmly. Daniel's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders stiffened, and his eyes shifted toward the floor before quickly returning to Ethan. What messages? Daniel asked. The denial came too quickly. Ethan folded his arms, studying him. The ones on your phone. Daniel didn't respond immediately. For several seconds he seemed to search for the right explanation, but the confidence that once defined him was gone. Ethan, it's not what you think, Daniel said carefully. Ethan almost laughed at the familiar phrase. It's exactly what I think, he replied. The room grew quiet again. Finally, Daniel leaned back against the couch and exhaled slowly, as though the effort of pretending had become too exhausting. It started a few weeks ago, Daniel admitted. Ethan waited. Daniel rubbed his hands together nervously. Things between us were already complicated. We barely talked anymore. That's not an excuse, Ethan said. I know, Daniel replied quickly. I'm not saying it is. There was a strange honesty in his voice now, something Ethan hadn't heard in months. I didn't plan for it to happen, Daniel continued. But when someone else started paying attention to me, I guess I let it go further than it should have. Ethan felt a sharp ache in his chest, but the pain wasn't as overwhelming as he expected. Maybe because part of him had already accepted the truth. Do you care about them? Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. The silence that followed gave Ethan the answer before the words arrived. I don't know, Daniel admitted quietly. That uncertainty was worse than any confession. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the reality of the situation. 2 years together had slowly unraveled into something fragile and unfamiliar. The connection they once shared now felt like a memory instead of a relationship. What happens now? Daniel asked after a moment. The question lingered between them. Ethan glanced around the apartment they had once built together, the framed photos on the wall, the small kitchen where they used to cook dinner side by side, the couch where they had spent countless quiet evenings. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt strangely clear. I think we already know, Ethan said. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though he had reached the same conclusion long before tonight. Neither of them shouted. There were no dramatic accusations or desperate attempts to fix things. The breakup arrived quietly, like the end of a conversation that had been fading for months. Daniel eventually stood and walked toward the bedroom. I'll pack a few things, he said. Ethan remained in the living room while Daniel moved through the apartment gathering his belongings. The soft sound of drawers opening and closing drifted down the hallway. Strangely, Ethan didn't feel anger anymore. Mostly he felt relief. When Daniel returned with a small bag, he paused near the door. "I never meant to hurt you," Daniel said. Ethan believed him, but intentions didn't change the outcome. "I hope you figure things out," Ethan replied. Daniel nodded once before leaving the apartment. The door closed gently behind him. For the first time in months, the space felt quiet in a different way, not empty, but peaceful. Ethan sat on the couch and stared at the dim lights outside the window. A lot had changed in a single night. His relationship was over, the future he once imagined had disappeared. And somewhere in the middle of all that uncertainty was Ryan Cole. Ryan had never pressured him or tried to replace what Ethan had lost. Instead, Ryan had simply stood beside him when everything else began falling apart. Ethan knew he needed time before rushing into anything new. But as he sat there in the quiet apartment, one thought kept returning. Tomorrow evening, the gym would open like always. Ryan would probably be there. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt curious about what might happen next.